Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's most innovative briefing. My name is Gina Waldhorn. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Sports Innovation Lab, and I hope you enjoyed that opening. That is our guest speaker who's going to join us later on today from Backyard Breaks, and that just gives you a taste of breaking, of trading cards, of where the memorabilia market has headed. And we are so excited today to talk about that through the lens of data. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me bring up some of our materials. Okay. So if you're not familiar with our innovation briefings, let me tell you about what we're going to do today. Everything we talk about is a view of a market or a trend or a sport or a community through the lens of data. At the core of our data source is a transactional data set of the purchases of more than 20 US based consumers. We can see everything they buy on their credit and debit cards, from where they pump their gas to where they buy their groceries to whether or not they buy trading cards or sports tickets. We can see it all. We built a tool and a taxonomy that allows us to view all those billions of rows of transactional data through the lens of sports fandom and consumer behavior so we can make sense of what the data is telling us is really happening in the market. And while we always like to balance kind of the science with creativity, we spend some time, we're going to look at the data, we're going to talk about the trends, and then we're going to end today with an interview with Bennett King from Backyard Breaks to talk about a little bit more about what is breaking and what does the future of collectibles look like. So happy to have you with us today if it's your first time. And why are we talking about breaking? Why are we talking about collectibles? Because it's a hot topic. And there's a lot of news lately about some of the key players doing new deals, winning deals, losing deals, about up and coming startups breaking into the space, about athletes investing, and really about the size of the market. This is no longer kind of dad's little hobby down in the basement with his books of old baseball cards. This is truly an emerging market. And with the accelerating force of digital and NFTs, collectibles have really taken a new shape and really moved into the limelight as they should be. So I'm still learning about collectibles. So while I'll be hosting a bit today, I'm going to be joined by two of our analysts, mainly Jordan Rutner, Director of Analytics at Sports Innovation Lab, and Abe Stein, Head of Innovation and Pokemon aficionado, will also be joining us throughout today to talk a little bit about his view of the market. All right, so Jordan, I'm going to bring you up on stage with me to start diving into the data. How's it going?
Not too bad. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. You're going to teach me a lot today too. So let's start with, how did we get here? What did kind of the evolution and the maturation of the collectibles market look like?
So there's a very normal history in a weird way that it seems like the collectibles industry follows a wave of how a lot of industries behave, where there's an introduction through marketing perks. And that's where we start in the 1860s too, where baseball cards, as Major League Baseball or professional baseball was becoming a pro sport, they were really marketing the game through giveaways. These were in tobacco, candy sales. Also, people were getting free cards with their purchases. And that continued on to Cracker Jacks, of course, as we know it today, where you do get something in there. The gifts might be a little less valuable, but it is the same concept in it. And then as the years were going on, we started adding biographies and statistics to the players also, so that we understand who our favorite players are and how valuable they actually might start to be based off of how good they are and what we want to know about them. But just like a lot of other businesses, we start seeing an increase in production to the point that it starts devaluing a lot of these assets. At the same time, we're seeing different types of entertainment come into the space of collectibles beyond just sports, where we're seeing introduction to the digital space, fantasy, Pokemon, as we'll dive into, of course, also. And that goes into the 80s, the 90s, and then in the early 2000s also. And we start seeing this leveling out where, okay, overproduction has slowed down. These collectibles, these assets are regaining their value. And then in 2020, when a lot of people had a lot more time to reflect on, just their lives, everything that's going on during COVID, they started digging up the binders of baseball cards that you were referring to, Gina, and finding these collectibles. They were going back to what they were inspired by as kids. A lot of adults that were realizing that they had such valuable cards in their basements that they might have gotten rid of over the years, moving between houses and life stages. And then we're also seeing at the same time an increase in the digital platform that is going to be NFTs and digital assets. Overall, a lot of these assets, while they did sell for so much money only just a couple of years ago, it's the same concept where it is just a digital piece of art in a lot of scenarios. So they are collectibles, they're just in a different medium. And that brings us to today, where we have a consolidation effort of a lot of different companies that are looking to acquire each other and to streamline the space also. They're combining digital assets with physical assets and then also mixing in experiences. And that's one thing that Fanatics is really trying to work on too, is adding the unique experiences as part of a collector's item almost.
Yeah, it really feels like the perfect storm kind of hit around COVID. And we really saw the whole industry in terms of sports and then the acceleration of a lot of kind of habits and rituals of, following players or doing huddle. And I think collectibles was part of that. So fascinating. And then what about the actual, we talked a little bit about the digital NFTs, but what about the idea of the collectibles themselves? And I might bring on Abe to give his POV on this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is just a quick summary to say that the collectibles have been fairly stable in what they mean and what they represent. The medium has changed a lot to the point that we had the original baseball cards being given away in tobacco and candy sales, coming on to different types of collectibles, if they're going to be cards, Beanie Babies, and the introduction of digital items, and then now tying these unique assets to unique experiences as well.
Yeah, I'll absolutely jump in here. I can start off by saying I haven't, in fact, caught all of the Pokemon. I'll let you know as soon as I do. I know that's what we're charged to do, catch them all, but I haven't yet. No, it's everything Jordan has said has really been on point in terms of the evolution and the trajectory of all of this. Something that started as marketing activation to generate interest and has evolved into its own, for a time cottage industry and then beyond at this point a full-fledged industry of its own. There's a few high-level things that I would want to point out. The first is understanding what are the motivations that drive collection and ownership of commodities related to sports in the first place, and not just sports. This can apply to Pokemon and Beanie Babies. But when we think about the sports industry, so much of the business of sports is predicated on this idea of relationships, the social psychology of relationship, right? The relationship a fan feels to a player, the relationship a fan feels to a team, a relationship a fan feels to an experience, right? And that's what's at play here with these collectibles, right? That's what's at play here with these commodities. It is a symbol, a reflection that can either inspire a relationship or that can drive a relationship. So that's a big part of it as well. Then there is the randomized piece. And this is this huge part of it, right? And what we all know about the origin of baseball cards and the origin of collectibles is that you don't choose what you get.
Right.
You rip a pack. And this is a big part of this breaking conversation. This, what has been called loot crate economies in the digital domain around video games, right? What, was really honed into an expert craft with the folks at Pokemon in terms of thinking around how drop rates are, impacting the rarity of different cards. That randomized piece, which is also fraught in its own way and potentially legislated in the very near future, is a critical component of all of this as well. And then there's a third piece that is about the digital. And so as we're kind of moving across this timeline, what you didn't have with physical commodities is control of the P2P market. I could pack a card and I could trade it, I could sell it, I could do whatever I wanted with it because it's a physical commodity in the real world, and it is a fungible tradable, right? Very, very clearly point. What you have in the digital space is control of the peer-to-peer markets. And when we look at examples that have been successful, whether it's Dapper Labs, and we think about what digital commodities are looking like going forward, it is not just the items or the value of those digital commodities and the relationship and the attachment that we have to those. And I have lots of, not NFTs, but my own digital items, whether it's EAFC cards in my collection or what have you. It is my ability to then exchange those on peer-to-peer markets with other people who have those as well, and who controls those markets. And that's a huge part of it, because the financial transaction is not just in the sale of the digital commodity, it's in the revenue that you can generate off of each of those transactions as well, too. So you have to see that whole big picture, I think, with all of this.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think what we're going to dive into now is the data. To your point, for the first time now, companies involved in the collectible space can see what's happening with those non-fungible and see what's happening on those peer-to-peer markets and track the value in a way that they never were able to track. Although I would argue my trolls, I don't think anybody can copy my trolls. I do have a troll collection. Okay, so let's keep going. So high level, our view of the market that we're going to dive into is there's consolidation taking place right now. These different types of collectibles appeal to different markets and different types of audiences. And we'll talk about who the collectibles audience is. And we're seeing innovation mainly in digital, but also this idea of the experience. So let's start diving into the data. Jordan, what data, when we say we're looking at data on collectibles, what do we actually mean? What data are we actually looking at?
So right now we're doing a focus more on the digital side of the collections, and we're looking at 6 different companies that specialize in these digital collectibles. And so far that's given us a base population of over 240,000 unique individuals that have made a purchase with any of these companies since 2016. Overall, it is, as we just talked about, a mix of entertainment where we have some sports focused and some in other realms too. But at the same time, we're seeing a little bit of consolidation when it comes here and some very heated just competition right now across these different players. One that I want to call out, TCG player here makes up a bulk of our population, and they were recently acquired by eBay. And eBay serves as a very valuable marketplace before Amazon took over as well. But eBay found themselves back into the collection industry instead of just on the resale market too.
Yeah, fascinating. And we have data on Whatnot and some other companies as well, but we really wanted to zero in on those merchants that we knew were collectibles. And again, of those 243,000 consumers, Sports Innovation Lab can see everything they've spent their with their debit and credit cards. So we can see they spend on collectibles and we can see everything else they spend on, which is what helps bring this data together. So let's talk about kind of how these collectibles markets started to grow and how people started to join. What are we looking at here?
So this is when we're looking at the first purchase that people have made towards any of the collection related companies that we just identified. And one thing that absolutely stands out is right here in the middle where we have March of 2021. And this is where a lot of people learned about the collection market through Dapper Labs more specifically. Now, Dapper's been around since 2018, but it looks like in the March of 21 is when a lot of people started to engage with that platform.
Yeah, and I'll jump in real quickly here for those who don't remember what it was like in March of 2021 when Dapper was in the news a lot. Remember what the conversation was about. It was not about the rarity of a drop. It was not about the rarity of a card that was packed. It was about the value of those on a peer-to-peer marketplace, which reinforces a lot of what we've been saying. And even that point about eBay's acquisition of TCG, it's control of those marketplaces is a big part of this conversation and understanding of that story. And so it was what the LeBron James NFT sold for that was making the news and making the press and driving more interest in those platforms.
Yeah, that's a serious spike. So let's dive a little bit deeper into Dapper Labs.
Yeah, so Dapper is overall a gaming studio that specializes in creating games, NFTs, and collectibles. And they have 3 very sports specific products that they help create, which are Top Shot, UFC Strike, and NFL All Day. And combined, these make up millions of people, where they have 3 million NFL users, 1.6 million NBA Top Shot users, and then almost a million UFC Strike customers. Now, when we look in our data also to try to see what else Dapper Labs fans are interested in when it comes to actually going and spending money on sports besides just on the collectibles, it looks like more often than not, they're going to be the ones that are streaming, which makes sense. If they're familiar with the digital platform, then they're probably going to be familiar with how to watch the game on a digital platform too.
Awesome. And playing golf, I guess, taking all their winnings and going to the course. And now, what about, if collectibles continue to grow in popularity, and sure, more people are coming in, but are they spending more? Is the market making more money?
Yes and no. There are companies that do carry it, and we'll dive into that into a few more slides from now. But overall, the average spend per person on an annual basis has increased over the years by an average of 27%. And we're seeing people spend about $450 on average per person per year towards these companies. And while 2022 is a little bit less than 2021, it is still higher than every other year prior to that too.
Wow.
A lot of spikes do come from a combination of summer and fall months. So as we do go into the fall and we're tracking these numbers continuously, it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this year plays out as well.
Yeah, and an important point I would just add there in terms of thinking about the volatility of this market for different players is that most of these organizations who have well established in the collectible marketplace understand that they're built on what's called a whales and minnows strategy for business, where the whales, the people who spend a lot of money, right, on many packs and many openings, are going to be the solid foundation of their business, and the minnows, those who spend a little bit here and there, are ephemeral, right? Balancing a whales and minnow strategy, as you might imagine, and sustaining that is a challenge, right? Because the minute you lose any of those whales, you don't have a solid bedrock or foundation of that middle tier that's spending a bit, right? You kind of lose your ecosystem. And so it can be a highly profitable approach, but it does require massive scale and the ability to retain through new content the whales and the minnows in engagement with the platform. So
that'll be a great discussion point to bring up with Bennett, because their whole platform at Backyard Breaks is very much, it's so entertaining. They do, I think, a great job of keeping more of the minnows who might not be making a lot of money, but they're having a great time watching the content and learning about the collectibles. So what about, we broke it down here at a month per month, so we know kind of year over year the average amount per fan is increasing. What about kind of more regular spending? Are we seeing kind of?
Yes, sorry, it cut out for a second on my end. Sorry.
Sure. So we're looking now at kind of month over month growing at a lower rate, only about 4%. And while there's definitely some seasonality here for sure, it's not, it's pretty steady. We're not seeing the same kind of seasonality that we see with traditional sports spending, right? Going to games during season and turning off. This looks a lot more steady. So talk about what this means.
I mean, one of the bumps that we've seen came in the summer months, which is typically a downside for, or down season for most traditional sports. As you just pointed out, it's not as seasonal. So taking advantage of some of these downtimes is something that the collectibles market does have an advantage of, that they can constantly stay in the news through the individual sports. Other forms of collectibles also are not as seasonal, like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon. There's no specific season or time of year where somebody could possibly engage in that the same way that it would be baseball. It feels like more of an annual activity, which is why it does feel a little bit more stable overall.
That's right. Squirtle does not hibernate. He is out all year round. And look, I mean, this is, I think, fascinating. Like, we've seen a lot of volatility in the economic market in a macro sense. In general, this is pretty stable.
Yeah, it is. Up until the past couple months, also for the most part, it looks like people spend maybe 2 or 3 times per month towards these different collectibles companies. And then in the past few months, August especially, having 4, there's definitely a recent spike there. So seeing if that continues also, while we're not done with September and we are seeing 1.6 transactions per person so far this month, there is still a lot to explore and see exactly if this is going to be something stable for the near future or in the long term as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a healthy business I would want to be in. And now what about kind of the future outlook and bringing new different people into the market? Let's talk a little bit about the kind of different players in the space and how they're each affecting the market.
Yeah, so earlier we saw the same shape graph where we were seeing the average spend per person just overall aggregated. But now we're adding a little bit of color to see if there are any particular companies that we highlighted earlier that are really driving this. And I want to focus in the middle here, again in that March 2021 bar. earlier we saw Dapper brought in a ton of new customers. And overall, that took up about 64% of March 2021's new collectors was made up by Dapper. But as we can see there, this is highlighted really in the spend category by Panini. So while Dapper might be bringing in a lot of new people, they might not be spending as much directly on the platform as they are at competitors like Panini Group. Overall, we saw the average monthly spend towards Dapper to hover a little bit above $200 per person, but then Panini is over $700 per person in that same time period.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, Panini's definitely, and sustaining, right? If you kind of,
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely sustaining. So that's really interesting. What about activity in terms of transactions and purchasing the cards?
So this is almost the opposite story. Yeah, Dapper has significantly more activity. And while we are seeing Panini with less activity, with only about two, maybe a little over two transactions per month, they are bringing in the most dollars per person, but significantly less transactions than Dapper, who had 14 transactions per person this past August.
Wow. I mean, why do you think that is? Like, what is it about? And maybe Abe, this view, is it something with the digital element that makes it just easier and faster to kind of like trade digitally? Or is it a time-based thing?
Yeah,
It,
I mean, go ahead, Jordan, please.
no, I was going to relate to you anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It's the ease of the transaction. It's the how facile it is to digitally make a transaction. I think it also speaks to what we were speaking about earlier, which is like, the way the ecosystems are established is like you need the people who are spending way more than 14 transactions per month, right? Like that is the sustaining element of this ecosystem is those whales who are, obsessively cracking open packs, especially in a relatively microtransactional. And Dapper is a little bit more expensive on that scale, but still in a sort of a quick transactional standpoint, you're dependent, and so that would offset the averages a bit too, right? In terms of thinking about where it sits. So important to understand that those averages. I'm assuming we're looking at mean averages here, right, Jordan?
Yeah, these are average transactions per person towards each merchant
Yeah. I mean, you
on
don't
in
walk
any
to the
given month.
mailbox. Like, you're just
Mm-hmm.
going to have, you got to go to a shipping center and wrap up a card.
Yeah.
You're just not going to do that 14 times. I mean, some
Right.
people will, but most people won't. Awesome. So let's now dive into a little bit about who are these collectors? Who are these 244,000 consumers? And if you want to reach them and engage them, how can you figure out who they are? So what we're looking at here is an analysis of the overlap between those 244,000 consumers who have spent with a collectibles merchant and some of Sports Innovation Lab's proprietary communities. So they're falling into our Gen Z community at close to 90%. Not shocking. They're kind of leaning a little, as we said, as the market expanded and brought in not just grandpa pulling out his old cards. We're seeing younger. They're gamers. So to be, again, fluent on those online marketplaces and working with a Dapper, it's not surprising that such a high percentage are gamers. They're into streaming. They have to be tech savvy. They're sports fans, but I think that's interesting. Less than half, about, close, but less than half are sports fans. So 50% have not made a single transaction with one of the big sports leagues or teams or streaming companies, in our database. So that, that could be the Magic. That's the Pokemons, or those are just the speculative investors who are interested in this space, but they're not also spending their money in a more traditional sports sense. And when the first time we see a sport pop up, not totally surprising, it's baseball. So when we look at kind of what's the number one sport amongst collectors, baseball still reigns supreme. And then looking a little bit deeper here at some of the other characteristics, they're 3 times more likely to also do some betting, I love it, Jordan, they're lovers. They're looking for love. They want to be lovers. So they're more likely to be 3 times more likely than the general population to be spending on dating apps, as well as engage in combat sports, which isn't totally shocking given the UFC strike partnership. They also spend a lot more. So on things like the mindfulness, so that's things like headspace or meditation. So maybe all that like anxiety about whether or not your cards are going to be worth something, you go let out with a nice 5-minute meditation session. And love seeing this, not surprised, but very validating. And we love exploring this in our data. They're spending on merch. So we can dive deeper in another session, or if you're curious. Also, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions about the data we're looking at today, pop them in the chat and we'll answer them. But these are merchandise companies like Fanatics, Rally House, Breaking Tea. They're looking at collectibles in other ways, probably besides just traditional cards. They want a cool shirt or a hat. Anything else to add on this, or did I cover up who these folks are pretty well?
I'm going to quickly add just
Yeah.
on the gambling coincidence here, which is a really important one. One of the broad macro trends that occurs across all industries in economic downturns is you see an increase actually in lottery spend. And I think one of the things to keep in mind as we think about our ecosystem right now is that I would expect a boom actually in this economy around the collectibles for the very same reasons. So worth keeping an eye on.
Awesome. Thank you.
One thing that I would caveat, of course, from the data perspective is while we are seeing a very strong digital population here, we are also starting with a mostly digital population too by the types of collectors that we're looking at.
So, of course. Good call.
Mm-hmm.
I think this kind of builds on your point. Do you want to?
Oh, yeah. So this is a very tight-knit community. One of the more cohesive that we've probably seen also, Gina, that when we were talking through this yesterday, they are very likely to spend with Discord and Patreon to connect with, talk to, support some of their favorite topics of choice when it comes to these collections. But they're also spending with different types of video games, potentially ones that they can associate their collections with. Over 50% of this collector's population is also spending with Nintendo, who happens to be the publisher of Pokemon as well. Now, of course, correlation, causation, all of that too, but the fact that
not
exactly, and then also Twitch outranking Xbox Game Pass too in terms of the percent of population that they're spending with. This just feels like a very strong sense of the word community when we are describing a group of people.
I love this. And I think any of our sports brands, our leagues, our team clients who are trying to figure out ways to build communities amongst their fans, partnering and working with collectibles companies is, clearly a way to tap into something that's very tribal. Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you both. I am going to kick you both out of the stage right now. Any final parting thoughts? And you're also welcome as we bring on our guest. If you have any questions for him, you can just yell at me in the green room and I'll bring you back. But Jordan, Abe, thank you both. You can catch some more of those.
Catch some more Pokemon, yeah.
Let's catch some of those Pokies, Abe. Okay, so before I am going to introduce our new guest, and I'm going to show a quick video. So I'm about to bring on Bennett King, who is a sports memorabilia salesman and breaker at the world famous collectibles company Backyard Breaks. Bennett graduated from St. John's University, where he started an apparel company, very successful, called The Brotherhood. And he worked summers creating content. So he's always been a content creator for a sports media company. He's been passionate about sports cards since he was teeny tiny. And he actually got his job at Backyard Breaks through the chat room. So again, thinking about that community. As the student becomes the master, he now lives his dream working for this incredible company in Fort Lauderdale. So if you're not sure what breaking is, as I wasn't when we started, I'm going to play you a quick video that gives you that shows a live break, and then we're going to bring on Bennett for the discussion. So I am going to go ahead and Love it. So, I mean, I felt it. I was excited. Like that was a break, right? That was how we break. So welcome, Bennett. Thank you so much for taking time. I know you should be live on air doing some breaking right now, but you're spending some time with us. So it's awesome to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about what is breaking, how is it kind of defined, and a little bit about Backyard Breaks as a company, what makes them unique. And as you heard us talk about the whole breaking and the whole collectibles ecosystem, where do you think kind of Backyard fits in all of that when you think about just what kind of a company it is?
No, for sure. So Backyard Breaks is a company that basically started out in like a garage, and they had a bunch of different friends, a lot of Florida State guys,
Oh, nice.
like fraternity brothers and everything. And they started on TikTok, and they all went live. And then Whatnot came around, and Whatnot's a huge breaking platform, and they have all different collectibles and items on it. And they started breaking from home. And it started with one TikTok account called the Backyard Athlete, and that turned into more. And as they went on and went on, they grew to be like the number one breaking company in the world. So our social media presence is great as well.
It's incredible.
And breaking itself is there's something called personal. So if you want a personal, that's where you're going to buy it directly from us. You get your own box sealed. We cut it, we open it, and we ship it straight to your doorstep. As well as there's 32 team breaks. So this is our most common thing we do at Backyard. So every single NFL team, it's all NFL cards, and there's MLB cards and everything, and every category is sorted. So like I'm from Minnesota, so the 3 Minnesota teams that you're looking for are the Vikings, the Twins, and the Timberwolves. So if you have a multi-sport break like that, you get all the teams from that team that you buy, and every card goes straight to your doorstep. And that's kind of like the biggest aspect of breaking for us. And they're all live from $1, and whatever the people see the value of that team is what they get.
So, okay, so you said they're live from $1 and you're buying by team. Talk to me a little bit about the business of breaking. So like what are the different ways you can make money? There's an auction where I just myself would go on and I'd say, I want that pack before you break it, but do I also maybe bid on actual cards after? Did someone try to buy that Ovechkin, or did someone already have bought the pack before you opened it? Like, what are the rules and how does Backyard Breaks make money?
Yeah, so like in that clip, you saw that guy. So that box costed $150. That guy currently has that card up on eBay around 5,000, I believe. So like right there, you buy that for $150, then you can flip that $150 into 5,000 plus. And obviously, we've had cards that have came out that have sold for $200,000, $300,000 plus as well. And we try to provide you with the value. So that's where the 32 teams come in. Because you can get into a big break that it would be $8,000 for the box if you were to just buy it yourself, but you can get in for $200 to $300 and get a team.
Oh.
And when those cards come out on your team, that's where you can go over to eBay or your own Whatnot or any other collectible site and flip those and sell those to whoever has the interest. And you can DM people on Instagram that collect certain teams and certain sports. And that's where like the money really is for like the value. So we try to give you the best value per team, and then whatever you value that at when you start at $1 is what the auction's going to end at, and then that you take all those cards home. You're hoping that you
Got
get one of
it.
those life-changing
So really
cards.
making it very like accessible. Like if I wanted to get into this, I don't have to try to afford that, $150 pack or something like that, a big expensive pack. I can just go buy the Dolphins or the Seminoles and do it with a couple. Do I do that alone? Do I buy my team, or do I sometimes do that with groups of people?
Well, you can do either. So like we'll have people that will come in and they'll be with their families. Like me and my dad, like before I started working at Backyard Breaks, we'd watch the TikTok and stuff. We never bought in, but we were like big supporters, and I loved watching those guys when I was growing up through college and everything. And I have bought in before in the past before I started working here, obviously, and everything. And like you said, I got the job from the chat, and I supported these guys for a long time before I came into the office.
Cool.
But yeah, so you can do it with the community if
Get
you want
in
10
lots of
people, and
different
you can all
ways.
split it and Venmo each other and try to get the best value and
Wow.
hope that you hit that huge $100,000, $1 million card. I mean, there's still cards that have a bounty out for $2 million right now. So if you open that box for 5,000, you get that card, you guarantee that $2 million from a buyer. And like that, there's active cards in the market like that as well.
Oh, wow. And so now the value of the cards obviously can be based on scarcity. They could be based on kind of limited edition things. But also, obviously, player performance is a huge component of how much a card is valued, correct? So I'd love to hear your perspective on, how much does that really matter, and how do you keep track of that? How do you monitor that? How does both Backyard Breaks, but then just as like a fan and a collectible collector yourself, are you like constantly keeping track with their performance and their scores or their eating habits and trying to kind of think about what might be valuable in the future? What's that link between the performance and the value of cards?
Yeah, so there's two different things that I would say people need to know. One of them is a sell, and one of them is a hold. So people will hold cards until, for example, Tom Brady, when he goes into the Hall of Fame, people will hold his cards until that point, and then you'll see his jump and his market increase. As well as if somebody wins a Super Bowl, like Patrick Mahomes, people would hold that card, and then right after the Super Bowl, they'd list on eBay, and the market's going to increase. And they're sell cards. So if you invest into somebody and you think that this year they're not going to have as good of a year, then you can sell all those right before the year starts, and you either can be wrong, they can have a great year, and the cards can double in value. So that buyer at that point is going to be very happy. If he bought that for a little bit cheaper and then he has a great year, he's going to sell it for double his money, 3 times his money at the end of the season. But also I mean, it can affect you negatively too. So like if you buy a bunch of one guy and then he gets an injury or something like that, then yeah, his market's going to decrease a little bit, and you're going to end up being stuck with a little bit more, and you're just hoping he comes back and has a bounce back year.
And what about kind of culture and like pop culture? Like, is Travis Kelce's card like exploding right now?
Yeah,
Is there
for
like a
sure.
Taylor Swift effect?
For sure, definitely, yeah. So you definitely see some of like the guys that are like in the media and stuff. It will increase their value. I don't know about the Taylor Swift Travis Kelsey relationship type thing. I don't know how much that's affecting his personal cards. Um, but for sure, I mean, his name being out there more just increases
Yeah,
it.
that's
When
true.
something
I
like
don't
that
know.
happens,
Or
it
you
goes
bring
up.
some of those Swifties into the collectible market because those Swifties have some purchasing power. I mean, they're moving the GDP. If you could figure out how to get them, tuning
Yeah,
into your live
who
break.
knows? Who knows? Maybe we'll
Um,
see a Travis Kelsey and Taylor Swift dual card at some point. That'll
Oh,
skyrocket the value.
that would be huge. And so a lot of you guys tell us a little bit more about the live channels. So I think you have multiple channels. I think you're 24 hours a day. What's the difference and what do you guys do and how important is the kind of like host and the entertaining? I mean, they found you through the chat and what role does that play in the business creating and I think you mentioned to me when we first met something like the Whatnot has a waiting list, a months or a year. I'd
Yep.
love to just hear kind of how you have approached the content forward strategy for Backyard.
Yeah. So anybody, like you said, you mentioned the waiting list and stuff. So anybody can apply to sell and whatnot. You have to have an inventory of stuff. You have to send pictures in so they know that you're legit and you're ready to go. But it does take a while to get approved and everything because there's a lot of sellers and there's thousands of people, I'm sure, applying every day to try to sell off their collectibles, their magazines, their comic books, and everything. So there's so many different people that are applying. Um, and yeah, so we have 5 different channels on Whatnot. Backyard Rips is our biggest channel, and then we're growing our baseball account and juice accounts, and we're just trying to get all those accounts at an equal level. Whereas like a baseball, like you talked about tops earlier being like the number one, baseball cards being the number one thing in the collectibles. We actually don't sell as much baseball as you'd expect.
Hmm.
We sell a lot of more football and basketball, but we are growing that baseball account. I don't know if that's just because of the season right now. It's baseball's kind of at an off season, like they're going into the playoffs, but right now they're not playing their best players or what that is. But with football season just getting started, we're seeing these football cards kind of these people investing into them and hoping that their players do well.
Oh, I love that. So, what does the future of collectibles, of breaking? I'd love you to touch on women's sports here at Sports Innovation Lab. We're looking at data all the time on women's sports, and we're just seeing a ton of new fans spending money on women's sports for the first time. So, obviously, it's more of a startup, 100-year-old startup in the world of sports that's starting to gain a lot of traction and see a lot of exponential investment coming in. So would love to hear just in general, like where do we go from here? What's on the horizon? Are we going to see like everyone try to hop on Whatnot? Where's the market headed? And if you could touch on if you think there's an opportunity more in the women's sports space, would love to hear your POV on that too.
No, of course. So I think there's a huge market for like new collectibles coming out. I think people are super like into influencers these days, like TikTok and all that. So I think you'll see a shift of cards that are coming from influencers, TikToks, Like Charlie D'Amelio had 100 million followers on TikTok. I'm sure she has cards out there somewhere. And as these people continue to grow, I think that is a huge opportunity there. And then as well as women's sports, they have started to produce a lot more women's cards coming out. We have some in the office as well. People will come in and buy them because, I mean, there's so many great female athletes out there. And like female soccer cards actually hold a great value as well, because I think that's probably the number one most followed women's sports. It's probably like U.S. soccer.
Yep.
And so like when you see those players, and they do have both of them, like in UFC, for example, there's women's UFC fighters and male UFC fighters in the same boxes. So like Ronda Rousey and all them are they come out of the same boxes as Conor McGregor and stuff, and they hold an incredible value in UFC as well.
Do they do surf cards?
Surf? I mean,
Yeah.
I've never seen a surf card. I'm sure there are some out there. I mean, we have
Just
Star
thinking
Wars.
of like the kind of
everything.
equal footing. World Surf League does an amazing job. They kind of have them at the UFC, one championship in the combat space. So that's really interesting. Okay, we only have like 1 more minute left. How does someone get started? Like if I want to go and is it as simple as, look, just show up and come to a live stream and make a purchase? Or is it do a little bit of research into a team that you love? What's the easiest kind of onboarding to not be intimidated to show up? Because again, a lot of I've watched your live streams. You got a crazy chat going on, that communal aspect of everyone talking, and you guys have code and you're using words that I didn't even understand what they meant. So it can be a little intimidating. What's the best way to get started?
So what I would do, I would download any of the apps that Breaking's on, whether that's Whatnot, Fanatics, TikTok, Twitch, all those different sites. And I would go in, I would interact, I'd find who you like the most as your entertainment value. Okay. And then I would just ask them. Also, basically every breaker I know has open DMs and they will respond to you. So if you have questions about the industry, feel free to ask me. My Instagram is Backyard Benny. Feel free to ask me if you're looking to get into collectibles, as well as Backyard Breaks. I'm sure we can help you out on our main Instagram. But yeah, anytime that you're looking to talk to somebody about the hobby, breakers are always here for you. We know basically everything you can know about the hobby. So when you want help, hop into a live stream on any of those platforms, and we'll take care of you from there. And we'll tell you your value on cards. We'll tell you if you think you didn't do great. We're a very honest community too. So, but when you do amazing, and most people do,
and that feels completely different than when I used to go into the baseball trading card store with my brother. There was like this elitist kind of club that if you didn't know the stats, you weren't allowed to play. And just the fact that you could actually have a conversation with the breaker and ask questions is amazing. And I think what you with the team over at Backyard Breaks is building is absolutely incredible. We can't wait to keep watching. If anyone on today's briefing has any more questions or wants to learn more about Backyard, about what Bennett's up to, make sure you follow him. Go check out all those live streams. And if you have any more questions for Sports Innovation Lab on this topic, hit us up because we're sitting on a lot of data. So Bennett, thank you so much for shedding all this fascinating light on this space of collectibles and Backyard Breaks, and can't wait to have everybody join us. We're back in 2 weeks. I believe we're going to be talking about music and entertainment through our data. So thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Bye. Thank you, guys.